I still remember the exact words my father said to me that gray October morning when I told him I was dropping out of law school. "You'll never amount to anything, Rebecca. You're throwing away a guaranteed future for some childish fantasy." His voice was cold, dismissive, the same tone he used in court when demolishing witnesses. "Without that law degree, you'll be nobody. Mark my words, you'll come crawling back, begging for scraps from the table I built." He turned his back on me then, straightening his expensive tie, and walked out of our family home. That was 8 years ago. Today he sits in the corner office of my company, reporting directly to me. Before we continue, tell me where you're watching this video from, and if you like the story, please leave your like and subscribe. Have an excellent day. My father, Richard Harrison, was everything a successful corporate lawyer should be. Impeccable suits, commanding presence, and a reputation that opened doors across the city. He'd built Harrison and Associates from nothing, or so he constantly reminded everyone. Our house was filled with awards, photographs of him with politicians and CEOs, and the suffocating expectation that I would follow in his footsteps. From the time I could walk, he'd tell people, "This is my daughter Rebecca. She's going to be a lawyer just like her old man." It wasn't a prediction, it was a decree. Growing up, I watched him work 18-hour days, miss every school play, every birthday party, every moment that mattered. When I tried to share my dreams, my ideas, he'd wave them away like annoying flies. "That's nice, sweetheart, but let's focus on what's important. Your LSAT prep starts next month." My mother, Patricia, would give me apologetic looks from across the dinner table, but she never challenged him. Nobody challenged Richard Harrison. In high school, while my classmates were exploring their interests, I was buried in pre-law programs and mock trials. I was good at it, I'll admit. I could argue, analyze, think on my feet, but I hated every minute of it. What I loved was watching my mother's small online boutique, seeing how she connected with customers, solved their problems, created something beautiful from nothing. She'd started it as a hobby, but it was growing. She had vision, creativity, passion. Everything my father dismissed as playing store. When I got into Harvard Law, my father threw a party. He invited every partner, every client, every person who mattered in his world. He gave a speech about legacy, about continuing the family tradition, about how proud he was. I smiled and nodded and felt like I was suffocating. That night, lying in bed, I made my decision. I would go to Harvard, but I would also start planning my escape. Law school was 3 years of intellectual prison. I learned contracts, torts, constitutional law, but I also learned something else. I learned about business, about strategy, about reading people and situations. I studied my classmates who were already networking, building connections, planning their futures. I watched how they positioned themselves, how they identified opportunities. I was learning, just not what my father expected. During my second year, I started a small consulting business from my dorm room. Nothing major, just helping. Local businesses with their social media presence and marketing strategies. I had a knack for it. I could see what they were missing, what their customers actually wanted. Word spread quickly. By my 3rd year, I was making more money than some junior associates at my father's firm. That's when I told him I was done with law school. I was going to build my own company. The explosion was immediate and devastating. "You ungrateful child," he screamed, his face red with rage. "Do you have any idea what I've sacrificed for you? The connections I've made, the doors I've opened? You're throwing it all away for what? Some internet nonsense?" He paced around his office like a caged animal, gesturing wildly at his diplomas, his awards, his shrine to success. "You think you know better than me. I've been building empires while you were playing with crayons." My mother tried to mediate, but he silenced her with a look. "This is what happens when you coddle children, Patricia. She thinks the world owes her something." He turned back to me, his eyes cold and calculating. "Fine. You want to play entrepreneur? Go ahead. But don't come crying to me when you fail. And you will fail, Rebecca. You'll fail because you don't have what it takes. You don't have the discipline, the intelligence, or the connections. You're nobody without this family name, and if you walk out that door, you're nobody to me." I looked at this man who was supposed to love me unconditionally, who was supposed to support my dreams, and I felt something inside me crystallize. It wasn't anger. It was determination. Cold, pure, unshakable determination. "We'll see," I said quietly, and walked out. The first 2 years were brutal. I moved into a tiny apartment, lived on ramen noodles and coffee, worked 20-hour days building my consulting business. I had no financial safety net, no family connections, no backup plan. Every potential client who knew my father would mention him, asking why I wasn't following in his footsteps. Some would even call him, asking about his confused daughter who thinks she can run a business. But I had something my father never gave me credit for. I had his analytical mind and my mother's emotional intelligence. I could read markets, anticipate trends, and connect with people in ways that pure logic never could. I started specializing in helping traditional businesses adapt to digital transformation. I wasn't just selling services. I was selling vision, helping companies see futures they hadn't imagined. My breakthrough came when I landed a contract with Henderson Industries, a manufacturing company that was struggling to modernize. Their CEO, Margaret Henderson, was a no-nonsense woman in her 60s who'd built her company through grit and determination. She didn't care about my age or my family. Drama. She cared about results. "Show me what you can do," she said. "Actions speak louder than pedigree." I transformed their entire customer acquisition strategy, developed new partnerships, and helped them launch a digital platform that tripled their market reach within 6 months. Margaret was so impressed, she introduced me to her network of business leaders. Word spread. Contracts poured in. I hired my first employees, moved to a real office, started building something substantial. By year 4, I'd rebranded as Harrison Strategic Solutions, deliberately keeping the family name, not out of sentimentality, but out of strategy. I wanted everyone to know exactly who I was and what I'd accomplished without my father's help. The company grew rapidly. We specialized in digital transformation and strategic consulting for mid-sized companies, the ones too big for freelancers, but too small for major consulting firms. It was a perfect niche, and we dominated it. I heard through mutual acquaintances that my father was struggling. His law firm, built on old-school networking and traditional practices, was losing clients to younger, more agile firms. The legal industry was changing, becoming more technology-driven, more client-focused, more collaborative. Everything my father had dismissed as modern nonsense was becoming essential. Harrison and Associates was hemorrhaging talent and revenue. Year 5 brought validation I'd never expected. I was featured on the cover of Entrepreneur magazine as one of 30 under 30 changing business. The article detailed my rise from law school dropout to successful CEO, mentioning my father's prediction that I'd never amount to anything. The reporter had somehow gotten hold of that quote, probably from someone who'd witnessed our final argument. The irony wasn't lost on anyone in our industry. That's when the calls started. First from my mother crying, begging me to come home and work things out. Then from family friends, suggesting I be the bigger person and help my father's struggling firm. Finally, from my father's partners, quietly reaching out to discuss potential collaboration opportunities. Everyone could see what was happening except the man himself. My father's pride kept him silent for months, but pride doesn't pay bills or retain clients. His firm was facing bankruptcy. 3 of his top partners had left for competitors. His biggest client, a real estate development company, had terminated their contract after 20 years. The legal world is small and news travels fast. Richard Harrison, the man who'd once commanded every room he entered, was becoming irrelevant. The moment I'd been unconsciously preparing for came on a Tuesday morning in March. My assistant buzzed my office. "Miss Harrison, your father is here to see you. He doesn't have an appointment, but he says it's urgent." I sat back in my chair, looking out at the city skyline from my corner office on the 42nd floor. The view was spectacular. I could see the building where his firm was located, smaller and darker from this height. He walked into my office wearing the same expensive suit style he'd always favored. But I could see the signs of strain. His shoulders weren't quite as straight, his confidence not quite as bulletproof. He looked around my office, taking in the awards, the modern furniture, the wall of windows that made his traditional wood-paneled space seem claustrophobic by comparison. "Rebecca," he said, his voice carefully neutral, "you've done well for yourself." It wasn't an apology, but coming from him, it was acknowledgement. "I hear you're expanding, looking for experienced legal counsel to head up your compliance department." He paused, and I could see what this was costing him. I'd like to be considered for the position. I let the silence stretch between us, not out of cruelty, but because I needed to process this moment. The man who told me I'd never amount to anything was asking for a job at the company I'd built from nothing. The man who'd said I'd come crawling back was here, in my office, essentially doing exactly that. "The position requires someone who understands modern business practices," I said carefully. "Digital transformation, collaborative leadership, adaptive strategy. It's not traditional corporate law." I watched his face, seeing him struggle with concepts he'd spent years dismissing. The person in this role would report directly to me. They'd need to be comfortable with that dynamic. He nodded slowly. "I understand. I've been learning about these new approaches. I know my methods haven't kept pace with industry changes." It was the closest thing to an admission of error I'd ever heard from him. "I'd be willing to start in whatever capacity you see fit." I offered him the position, but not as head of legal. I started him as senior legal advisor, a title that sounded impressive, but made it clear he was not in charge. His salary was a third of what he'd made as a partner in his own firm. He would have a small office, not the corner suite he'd always commanded. He would attend meetings where his daughter was the final decision maker, where younger employees would present ideas he'd need to implement. The first few months were an adjustment for both of us. I watched him struggle with protocols he'd never had to follow, with technologies he'd always dismissed, with a collaborative culture that valued input over hierarchy. But I also watched him learn. Slowly, carefully, he began to understand that the business world had evolved beyond the old-school power dynamics he'd mastered. He was good at the work, I'll give him that. His legal mind was still sharp, his attention to detail invaluable. He helped us navigate complex regulations, protected us from potential lawsuits, and brought a level of institutional knowledge that benefited everyone. But he did it all while working for the daughter he'd once dismissed as a failure. The real satisfaction came during our quarterly board meetings. I'd invite him to present legal updates to our board of directors, successful business leaders who respected what I'd built. They'd listen to his reports, ask questions, and thank him for his contributions. Then they'd turn to me for strategic decisions, recognizing clearly who was in charge. He was competent, valued, essential even, but he was not the leader. That role belonged to the daughter who'd never amount to anything. Our relationship remained professional, but grew warmer over time. He began to see the company through my eyes, to understand the vision I'd been trying to share years ago. During one late evening, as we worked together on a particularly complex contract, he looked up from his papers and said, "You built something remarkable here, Rebecca. Something I didn't think was possible." It wasn't an apology for his earlier words, but it was recognition. It was enough. My mother visited the office occasionally, beaming with pride at seeing her family working together. She'd never say it directly, but I could see her satisfaction at the reversal of roles, at watching her husband learn humility from the daughter he'd tried to control. She'd started her own business too, expanding her boutique into a successful online platform. Strong women, it seemed, ran in our family. The most telling moment came during our annual company retreat. I was giving a presentation about our 5-year growth strategy when I noticed my father in the audience, taking notes like any other employee. This man who'd once commanded courtrooms, who'd built his identity around being the smartest person in every room, was diligently writing down insights from the daughter he'd predicted would fail. After the presentation, a younger employee approached him. "Mr. Harrison, it must be amazing working for your daughter. She's incredible." I watched his face carefully. wondering how he'd respond to this public acknowledgement of our reversed roles. He smiled, and for the first time, it seemed genuine. "Yes," he said simply. "She is." 8 years ago, Richard Harrison told his daughter she'd never amount to anything without his name, his connections, his approval. Today, that daughter employs over 200 people, has been featured in international business publications, and serves on advisory boards for major corporations. Today, Richard Harrison works for his daughter in a company that bears his name but represents her vision. I don't think about revenge anymore. What I built was never about proving him wrong. It was about proving myself right. I knew I had something valuable to offer the world, something that couldn't be measured by traditional metrics or constrained by conventional paths. I had vision, determination, and the ability to see possibilities others missed. The sweetest victory isn't having my father work for me. It's watching him finally understand that success isn't about following predetermined paths or meeting other people's expectations. It's about having the courage to build something meaningful, even when everyone around you says it's impossible. It's about turning, "You'll never amount to anything," into, "How can I be part of what you've built?" Some evenings, when the office is quiet and I'm working late, I look out at the city lights and think about that gray October morning 8 years ago. The girl who walked out of her father's house with nothing but determination and a refusal to accept his limitations has become a woman who employs the man who tried to define her future. It's not the ending either of us expected, but it's the one we both deserved.